On this edition, I'm going to break down and predict the upcoming fight between Jon Jones and Dan Henderson taking place at UFC 151. Now, this fight's really old school versus new school. Obviously, old school being Dan Henderson, new school being Jon Jones. And both fighters are on win streaks. Obviously, Jon has defended his belt now. Well, since winning his belt, he's on a 4-fight win streak. His win streak is much longer than that. And obviously, Dan Henderson's on a 4-fight win streak, defeating Shogun Rua on his return back to the UFC. And this could be a very interesting fight. Really, is that both guys are very skilled wrestlers. Both guys are deadly in the stand-up game, so it should be a very good fight. So I'm doing this. I'm just going to break down both fighters. I'm going to do my predictions. So I'll start with Jon Jones. Now, what could not be said about Jon Jones? The guy is coming off of one of the most impressive years in mixed martial arts history. I mean, the guy's defeated Shogun. He's defeated Rashad Evans. He's defeated Rampage Jackson. I mean, the list goes on. He's defeated Lyoto Machida. A long laundry list of guys who are former champions in the light heavyweight division. And he's showing no signs of stopping at all. Now, Jon Jones' skill set, he's obviously training at Jackson's with Greg Jackson himself, and Jon Jones' striking continues to get better every time. Obviously, he comes from a wrestling background, but Jon Jones' striking, if you want to talk about versatility and dynamic, Jon Jones is exactly that, and every single time he continues to add more weapons to his arsenal every time he steps into the octagon, and he has an incredible reach, 84.4-inch reach, huge reach advantage in this fight, a huge reach advantage over almost any opponent that he faces. And Jon Jones, I don't want to say he has one-punch knockout power. Jon Jones has a lot of power behind his punches, but Jon Jones has 8 knockouts on his resume. A lot of them come, it's really his style is that he's going to beat you down, he's going to pick you apart, he's going to find openings, he's going to beat you down, he's going to get you down on the ground, he's going to bully you on the ground, he's going to use those huge elbows that he has, he's going to beat you down. Yeah, I don't want to say, Jon Jones could very well knock a guy out with one punch, but I don't want to say that he has one-punch knockout power just yet. He could be developing it, but I do not give him the knockout power advantage in this fight. However, Jon Jones is just on his feet with his explosiveness, his athleticism, his speed. He changes levels. He uses combinations. He's developed front kicks. His leg kicks are some of the most deadly ones out there. He fights his range very well. There's very few fighters that do that, and Jon Jones fights his range perfectly. The thing is, though, I think the one thing is that Jon Jones, if somebody is to get inside his reach, that's when I'd really like to see how Jon Jones fights. And we've seen Lyoto Machida do it a couple of times in the first round, but I'd really like to see a guy put pressure on Jones and how he handles that adversity. He fights his range very well. He's very comfortable behind his range and his reach, but I'd like to see somebody pressure him and get inside that. And everybody says they have the answer for it, but very few fighters can implement that strategy because Jon Jones makes it so difficult. Because when you get close to him, Jon Jones' best part of his game, even though his striking is very impressive and it's getting better, Jon Jones' wrestling is outstanding. I mean, with his Greco-Roman background, if he gets a hold of you, he's going to slam you down to the ground. He's going to sweep your leg. He's going to pick you up and toss you. You're going for a ride if he gets a hold of you. And even in the clinch, he could throw knees. He separates with spinning elbows, spinning back fists. The possibilities are endless on the stand-up, but when he gets you down to the ground, his legs are the best leverage for him. It's practically impossible to get out from under Jon Jones once he has you on the ground. He takes his time, he's aggressive, he postures up, he makes you work when you're on your back, and there's really no answer for it. Jon Jones rains down elbows. The guy uses elbows more from guard or when he postures up better than anybody, and they're just so powerful, and that's how he could TKO and knock out guys on the ground. And also along with that, Jon Jones may be a very skilled wrestler, very good ground and pound guy, but his submission game is getting better and better every time. He's a very underrated submission, I want to say expert, a very underrated submission practitioner, submission guy in the light heavyweight division in MMA. Jon Jones has 5 submissions on his resume, and we've seen him do it to black belts under Nogueira, obviously that being Lyoto Machida. We've seen him do this time and time again. He makes it look easy. So Jon Jones' wrestling, his submission game, it's unbelievable how it's come a long way, and Jon Jones continues to get better every time he gets in the octagon. So some pros and cons for Jon Jones. Pros is definitely his range, 84.4, huge reach advantage in this fight. He definitely has the speed and athleticism in this fight. I'd say he definitely has the better cardio, too, in this fight. There's no doubting that. This one's going to be going 5 rounds. If he gets Henderson into the later rounds, he will be very successful, and he's very confident. Jon Jones is one of the more confident guys. I'd say he's the more dynamic striker in this fight, too, and he's the better submission expert in this fight. I'm not going to say he's the better wrestler, given Dan Henderson's wrestling background, but those are some of the pros for Jon Jones. Cons for Jon Jones. I want to see how Jon Jones fights when faced with adversity, when his back's against the wall and somebody gets inside his reach and pressures him. We've seen it before, but I'd like to see a guy continuously do that in a fight. I'd like to see how Jon Jones fights that if his back is to get against the wall in this fight. Also, I'm going to say that he doesn't have the knockout power advantage in this fight. either. And that's really, I mean, how many cons can you really have for Jon Jones? There's very few. So that's why I have for Jon Jones. Where I see him being successful in this fight, he could be successful in this fight, but I don't see really the point of trying to play into Dan Henderson's very powerful right hand. I think if he can get this fight down to the ground, I think Anderson Silva and plenty of other fighters have laid out the blueprint to how to beat Dan Henderson. You can't knock the guy out, get him down to the ground, and submit him. And I definitely could see Jon Jones doing that if this one goes into later rounds. So that's where I see Jon Jones being successful. So Dan Henderson's a legend of mixed martial arts. Pride. He's fought in Strikeforce, fought in multiple promotions, obviously in the UFC as well, and he's making a run. And for a guy his age, Dan Henderson continues. In my honest opinion, I think he gets better and better. Obviously, his gas tank and his cardio suffers later in age, but I think Dan Henderson's experience and how much better he's getting in his older age, it shines, really. That's just my honest opinion on that. So, regards to his skill set, Dan Henderson is a very simplistic striker, really. There's no secret to Dan Henderson's success on his feet. He sets up with his jab. He has a very good 1-2, but that 2, his right hand is one of the most deadly things on the planet in mixed martial arts. It's the ultimate chin tester. And Dan Henderson has 13 knockouts on his resume. The guy, there's no secret. Everybody's always like, oh, well, Dan Henderson's not going to land the big right on me. There's no way he's going to do it. But Dan Henderson, time and time again, I'm not saying he knocks out guys with the right, which he's done before, but Dan Henderson always lands the right. He's an accurate striker with his right, and he sets it up perfectly. However, Dan Henderson's at a big disadvantage in this fight. He has a 71-inch reach. Jon Jones has an 84.4-inch reach. A massive reach disadvantage, and I think that is a big factor in this fight. However, Dan Henderson, if there's a guy, we've seen time and time again, Rampage Jackson, Rashad Evans, Leon Machida, and we saw a little bit with Leon Machida pressuring Jon Jones. You got to get inside Jon Jones' reach. And we thought Rampage and Rashad could possibly do it, but both guys sat outside the pocket. I don't want to say they were scared to step inside, but you know what? Nobody took the risk of stepping inside, eating the shots, and trying to pressure Jon Jones. That there is a fighter stylistically who has the chin and the power in their hands to do this, it is Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson has never been knocked out before. He has an incredible chin. He tucks in, he bowls right through the strikes, and he lets the right hand go. And he has incredible torque behind that too. He puts his whole body into that thing. It is the ultimate chin tester. So that, really, stylistically, if there is a fighter who is going to pressure Jon Jones and try and put Jon Jones out of his comfort zone, seeing Jon Jones fight so comfortably all the time behind his reach, it's Dan Henderson. So that's just my take on that. Then also in regards to Dan Henderson's good in the clinch. He has a Greco-Roman background. He can throw strikes in the clinch. He could slam guys. He could do a double. He could do a single. He's a very compact guy. He has very good, I want to say, core strength. Dan Henderson's a very strong guy. And he could toss guys down to the ground. It'll be interesting to see how he wrestles and fares against a wrestler the caliber of Jon Jones. Obviously, he's an Olympic wrestler as well. Dan Henderson, Greco background as well. He could get down to the ground. He can rain down ground and pound. I don't want to say Dan Henderson's a submission guy, really. The guy goes out there to knock people out or beat you down. He can submit guys. I don't see him submitting Jon Jones in this fight. I do not see that happening. So some pros and cons for Dan Henderson. Pros are definitely his knockout power and Dan Henderson's experience, his knowledge for the game. He's a very smart stand-up fighter. He picks his spots. I want to say his aggressiveness, his ability to press the pace, and definitely his chin. He's never been knocked out before. Cons for Dan Henderson, his cardio. We saw in the Shogun fight. We've seen him plenty of times. Dan Henderson likes to finish fights early, or he likes to try and finish fights early. So cardio's a factor. I think Dan Henderson has two, maybe to the second or third round to finish this fight. If not, he's in a lot of trouble. Also, another con would definitely be his submission game. I think Jon Jones, if he could get him down the ground, he will submit Dan Henderson. Obviously, his reach is a huge disadvantage as well in his size. So that's what I have for in regards to Dan Henderson. Where I see him being successful in this fight, there's no myth to this at all. Dan Henderson needs to knock out Jon Jones. He's not going to take this one to decision and beat Jon Jones. He needs to knock out Jon Jones. He needs to pressure him. He needs to get inside the reach. He needs to land the right hand, and he needs to finish Jon Jones. That's the only way. And plenty of fighters have laid out the blueprint, but it's a matter if he can implement his game plan successfully. So that's where I see Dan Henderson being successful in this fight. So where my prediction lies, and no doubt, I'd say out of 100 times, Jon Jones wins this fight 99 times, and Dan Henderson wins it 1 time. So this is something I got myself into a long time ago. I said stylistically Dan Henderson has what it takes to possibly defeat Jon Jones, and I'm standing by this prediction. I think Jon Jones is most definitely the favorite, and most likely I'd pick him any other time. But you know what? I'm going to stand by my initial prediction. I'm going to say that Dan Henderson does what is necessary, pressures Jon Jones, shows no respect and no disregard at all, pressures Jon Jones, gets inside him, and he knocks out Jon Jones. However, I think if Dan Henderson is to do this, it is within the first 2 rounds, maybe the 3rd round. If not, his gas tank will be empty, and Jon Jones will have his way with him. However, I'm going to stand by my word. I'm not one to back out on it. I've made this thing a long time. I think it was 6 months ago. I've been facing a lot of ridicule for it, but I don't care. personally, I'd take Jon Jones, but, I'm going to stick by Dan Henderson. I'm going to say Dan Henderson wins this fight at UFC 151. He dethrones the champion Jon Jones and defeats him via knockout at UFC 151, is crowned the new light heavyweight champion in the UFC. And that's what I have for this edition. This is Kyle Delaney signing off. I'm out here.